Hi folks, hope you are well. Do you know much about the story of Airfix? If not, grab yourself a drink, get comfy in your chair as I'm about to take you on a rip-roaring ride through the history of Airfix. During this video, we will even go through those complexities and hopefully explain the relationship between the trinity of Heller, Humbrol and Airfix, which went very sour at the turn of this century. We'll be taking on board the highs, the lows and the exciting times ahead of the plastic model empire that conquered childhoods, cluttered dining tables and covered ceilings of snot-filled kids with aeroplanes across the globe. Airfix was founded by Hungarian Nicholas Cove. This Cove chap, a Jewish refugee with a knack for business, had already made a name for himself in Spain and in Italy with some clever collar stiffening trick called Interfix. But in 1939 he sets up shop here in Blighty, picks a name starting with A to hog the front of the trade directories and slapped X on the end because, well, it sounds snappy, and Airfix it is. Now, Airfix wasn't always about Spitfires and sailing ships and tanks. Oh no, it was born to stuff air into mattresses and to manufacture inflatable rubber toys of all things. Then they started with the boring stuff like combs. Yes, in 1947 some clever clogs named Iceland Thomas points them to a fancy new injection molding machine. They were the first company to bring injection molding machines to the UK, and suddenly Airfix is churning out more combs than a barbershop nightmare, and all through Woolworths. They were the kings of plastic grooming, but fate had bigger plans. Around the late 1940s, Cove had an operation for cancer and hires two ex-RAF chaps. Ralph Ehrman to help steer the ship as the comb game was getting too hairy with too much competition, and John Gray, who led Airfix through the boom and bust days. So Airfix needed a new trick and they suggested they dabble in models. They were commissioned to build one, so borrowed the tooling and knocked out a pre-built model of a Ferguson TE20 tractor for salesmen to give to their farmers who had bought one. Solid, but about as exciting as a vicar's bicycle, until they didn't have the budget to build it themselves, and then they released it as a kit in a box for 2 shillings and 11 pence. Now enter Jim Russon, Woolworth's head buyer and a man with a nose for a deal. He'd seen these ships in bottle kits doing a roaring trade in America, made by some outfit called Gowland and Gowland. Russon, with all the charm of a market store hawker, tells Airfix to get in on the act because he saw that Airfix could produce something similar. But being Airfix, doesn't just copy the Yanks on this occasion. Oh no, they decide to mould their own ship kit, starting with the Golden Hind. The prototype came in a box like a Ferguson tractor, but priced higher at 5 shillings, that's 60p. But back then that might as well have been a mortgage. Russon, true to his Woolies pile 'em high, sell it cheap mantra, threw a bit of a wobbly. 2 bob or nothing, he probably bellowed, and Airfix, ever the innovators, ditched the box for a clear plastic bag with a bit of paper stapled on, slashing the price to 2 bob or 24 pence. Genius. Woolworths ordered 30,000 kits, and just like that, the 2 bob Airfix kit was born, kicking off a revolution in 1953. The Golden Hind was a hit, so they followed it with the Santa Maria and, bizarrely, the HMS Shannon, a ship so obscure it's only famous because Airfix made a model of it. Ralph Ehrman, with a cheeky glint in his eye, picked it up from the Americans who were banging on about the USS Chesapeake, a frigate the Shannon had walloped in 1813. Yes, it was petty, but more so a brilliant move. By 1955, Airfix was on a roll, churning out kits like the Cutty Sark, a Rolls Royce, and hold on to your hats here, their first aircraft, a Spitfire. Now, this wasn't just any old Spitfire. In fact, it was a bit of a bodge. It scaled down from a 148 Aurora model to 172nd in accuracies and all, plus provided a dodgy scheme, particularly a scheme of a BTK squadron code provided in that decal sheet. That code was never used on a Spitfire, as it was used by a squadron operating the Supermarine Walrus amphibious biplane. Apparently, Cove, ever the penny pincher, made Ehrman and Gray underwrite that mode cost. They must have been shitting themselves, but the gamble paid off. The Spitfires flew out of Woolworth shells faster than you can say dogfight. Airfix had cracked it. By 1956, Airfix was a proper player, not just some comb peddling outfit. They were pumping out ships, vintage cars and more aircraft like the Gladiator, Sopwith Camel and a Messerschmitt Me 109, so the kids could dogfight it with a Spitfire, all the while sticking to their constant scale mantra: 1/72nd for planes, 1/32nd for cars and 1/76 for trains and tanks. Other companies were faffing about with random scales trying to fit their boxes, but Airfix played the long game and it paid off. Then came a proper drama. Woolworths, their main squeeze, had got greedy, wanting a bigger slice of Airfix's pie. They started flirting with other kit makers, thinking they could strong-arm Airfix. Big mistake. Ehrman, quoting some goose and gander proverb, told them to bugger off and open Airfix kits to every model shop in the land. Woolies lost their exclusive deal and Airfix Spitfires and sailing ships were suddenly everywhere, including the local newsagents. By 1958, Airfix was promising new models every month, and they weren't kidding. 55 kits that year alone, including big hitters like the Lancaster and the Wellington. They even launched a range of trackside kits for train nerds, all in 1/76 scale. By 1959, they decided to tool a brand new Spitfire Mark 9 with far more accuracy and a correct scheme. In 1957, Airfix goes public and became Airfix Industries, but not long after, in 1958, Nicholas Cove dies, just 3 weeks after his wife Clothide died. Just popping in here very quickly to ask a bit of a favour. If you are enjoying the content on this channel but are not yet a subscriber, will you please consider becoming one? It's completely free and all you've got to do is click subscribe, ring that bell, click all, and you'll be notified when I release a new video. Anyway, let's get back to the history of Airfix. It's 1963 and Airfix were just unstoppable. The packaging got a makeover with new box art, and a chap named Roy Cross started painting artwork so good it made kids beg their parents to let them clean their chimney for pocket money. His Dornier DO 217 box art was practically a call to arms. The 60s and 70s were Airfix's glory days. They were chucking out up to 36 kits a year, from tanks to trains to prototypes like the Rotterdam and Concorde, though they did retool that Concorde when it did fly to make it more accurate. Airfix released their first catalogue and dabbles in magazines. The Airfix magazine ran from 1960 right up to 1993, full of tips and tricks on how to make your Hurricane look less like a wonky kite. And annuals, proper Christmas fodder for the glue sniffing brigade. They still continue to delve into toys and games, expanding themselves into other markets. Now let's set the scene. The mid-1970s were their golden era. You see, factories were churning out kits like a Temu sweatshop. Kits were now packaged in their award-winning blister pack design. Then they jumped into the bigger scale for their model kits, and we're talking the legendary 1/24 scale Spitfire, a beast of a model that took up half your desk and cost more than a decent steak dinner. They followed it up with the Messerschmitt Bf 109, the Hawker Hurricane, and even the Harrier jump jet, because nothing screamed fun like a plane that hovers like it's too lazy to fly. And let's not forget the Apollo Saturn V rocket kit from 1970. Right in the middle of the space race hangover, when everyone was still buzzing about moon landings, you could build your own lunar surface, assuming you didn't accidentally launch it into next door's garden. It seems to me that Airfix could do no wrong, and was clearly the #1 construction kit company in Britain and the world, and had more ranges than any other company, especially if you add the Meccano and Dinky UK based businesses they bought in 1971. General Mills bought the French Meccano business, but more about that story later. But oh, how the mighty fall. The late 1970s, the oil crisis hits like a sledgehammer to the wallet. Plastic prices shoot upward faster than an English electric lightning, and suddenly everyone's too busy queuing for petrol to bother about fiddling with sprues and cement. They even closed the doors on the Meccano factory in Liverpool. Airfix were wobbling like a badly designed undercarriage. The recession of the 1980s piles on, and the company's not just making kits anymore, they've got their fingers in all sorts of pies, like slot cars from MRRC, toys like Weebles, manufacture for the toy company Play School, also manufacturing plastic games like Flight Deck and who knows what other nonsense. Even government passing them cash just wasn't helping. Cash flow, more like cash hemorrhaging. By 1981, it's all over. Receivers are called in, and unlike their Weebles, they did fall down. Airfix is sold off like a clapped out old chest freezer at an auction. First to MPC scale model owners General Mills under their UK Palatoy company. Those American breakfast cereal cowboys who thought that putting a picture of what's in the box, like their cereals, was a great marketing tool. The box art was their model painted and is about as appealing as a 3-week-old ham sandwich. They shipped the tools from England to the factory in France where they were producing Meccano. Apparently, they rebranded with what we call the Type 8 logo, and boxes had made in France on them. For the first time, they also reboxed Airfix kits under their MPC name in America. Then, after 5 years, General Mills decides to get out of making toys and focus on their Cheerios and Lucky Charms. Now this is where it gets a little bit complicated, because people are somewhat confused and misinformed on how the trinity of brands or companies worked when Airfix was sold by General Mills as they were dumping Palatoy UK. Now I've delved deep into the interweb with this. I've tried to cross the T's and dot the lowercase j's to get some idea of the timelines and how they operated themselves. And hopefully there'll be a diagram on the screen now. Borden Incorporated US, another food empire famous for its dairy products and Elmer's glue, they had another arm of the company called the Hobby Products Group, and in 1976 they bought Humbrol, a name that sounds like a disease you catch from a dodgy kebab, and basically Humbrol were the paint guys, often high from making their enamel paint ranges, had also been known to release scale model kits as well, but never their own tooling. They were Reebok's Heller and Eastside kits, and they released around 50 of these, and the last ones were in 1985. Now, Borden was interested in Airfix back in 1981 when they had just bought Heller, who went bust around the same time. Probably saw it as a way to shift more of their enamel sludge, and they continued to make the paint in the UK, based in Marfleet in Hull. There are two separate companies, though they did partner up through the 80s and 90s, releasing just under 200 kits with the name Heller and Humbrol, so Heller Humbrol together. Now back in 1986, and Borden bought Airfix and placed it under the Humbrol business, hence why when you look at a box during that time it will have Humbrol product on it. Heller would also have Heller SA, and their box art came back to the artists, so we had box art to inspire us to build. All the tools were shifted from that original French factory that Palatoy used to the French Heller factory in Troyes. And during that time, Airfix and Heller were releasing brand new tooling and model kits, but basically they were sharing the tooling as well, as each were releasing the kits each other had developed and made. Everything was tootling along. Modelers were getting their models in either branding and buying Humbrol enamel paints, and they were the main weapons of choice to build and finish a scale model. The 1980s and the 1990s came along, and it's a bit of a mixed bag. Airfix is limping along, reboxing old favourites and trying to recapture that magic. They still pumped out classics, tanks, ships, soldiers, but it's not the boom times anymore. The hobby's shrinking. Competition is everywhere, especially from the Japanese hordes with their precision engine nonsense like tanks and armoured vehicles. And sadly, kids became more interested in Pac-Man than painting panzers. In 1994, the group was acquired by Irish investment company Allen and Maguire, and the business was restructured under the Humbrol Limited name, dropping the Hobby Products Group name, but still treated as two separate entities. Now the 2000s come along, and this is where it goes pear-shaped for everyone. The venture capitalist Allen and Maguire lost control of Humbrol PLC in 2003, as the purchase of that company laden them with huge amounts of debt. The Bank of Scotland then takes control. In 2005, a management buyout led by ex-Humbrol managing director Steve Lord buys Heller SA, which included the factory and all Heller tooling, thus creating Global Natural Limited, but continues to manufacture kits and use Humbrol paint. A year later, that company collapses, and with no factory to make kits, takes out Humbrol and Airfix as well. You see, when Heller went into receivership, they stopped making the kits for Airfix, and here's the catch: the receivers wouldn't even give Airfix the moulds, so Airfix completely run out of supplies. Since it was warned it could take at least 2 years for Airfix to get their moulds back, adding on the financial woes, mismanagement, the usual cock-ups, they had no option but to fold. And that looked like the end of Airfix and Humbrol. Fortunately, Hornby Hobby swoops in like a hawk missile. Hornby, yes, the train set guys. They buy Airfix for a bucket of coal. And because Airfix is owned by Humbrol, they probably get that brand for free. Or so I imagine. But the divorce is still messy. Hornby didn't want anything French, and the receivers dealing with the Heller SA factory didn't want to lose that valuable tooling. Heller were just starting again, and if the tooling was removed, it would leave many people unemployed without that Airfix business. But like a custody battle of who got the kids, Airfix managed to negotiate and retrieve most of the tooling that Airfix owned, and some went to China whilst the rest got sent to India, until all the tooling ended up there in India. With gusto, Hornby pours money into Airfix, providing them new modes using the latest CAD software, revamps the range, and starts churning out kits that don't snap if you look at them funny. Vintage classics are launched, dog bite doubles return, 2 planes in a box for the price of 1 ego bruise. Check out my 3 big changes Airfix made video right there or there. That explains a lot of the good stuff Airfix was doing behind the scenes. The 2010s came. Steady as she goes, Airfix expands with new figures, buildings, and even dioramas. Planes, tanks. They continued the relationship with Humbrol paints, manufactured still in the UK, and create new relationships like putting Carlsberg of decal sheets in their kit. Cartograph, probably the best decal sheets in the world. Ships like the Mary Rose get the Hornby treatment with a fresh new tool, and Airfix kits design get more sharper and accurate. No more of that 1950s mush where your Spitfire looked like it had been designed by a blindfolded chimp. but by 2020 they are still moving forwards, especially on the internet, with a huge social media presence, with videos on YouTube and forums for modelers to argue over panel lines and the colour of cockpit grey green. They're dropping monthly flight deck videos, workbench blogs with news and information roundups for the hardcore. Who knew model kits needed a newsletter? But they are very popular. With a revamped website in 2023 to increase sales online, they have embraced this new world. Plus, new subjects and kits are now scanned if possible, helping the designers create more detailed and more accurate kits, a marvel of modern technology. The thing is, Airfix has always been part of the fabric of UK pop culture. Thunderbird used their bits back in the 1960s. Santander had an advert with Lewis Hamilton and an F1 car back in 2008. Even Kit Kat got in on the act with an advertising masterpiece of putting a Kit Kat in everyone's kit so you can have a break from your scale model building. Pop culture is gold, and I believe with the brand so well known as Airfix, that is somehow why they are still standing today. I take and give to you hoovering and vacuum cleaning. We don't vacuum clean a house, we hoover, and it's the same with scale model building. People say, oh, you build Airfix. It's the same. And now here we are in 2025 and Airfix is still kicking like a donkey on steroids. Hornby's got them firing on all cylinders. New range launched this year with fresh mouldings, re-releases and vintage classics that hark back to the glory days, to take you back to when men were tough and kits were tougher. That 124 Spitfire Mark IX from 2022, a slight nod to the 1970s Mark I original, but better, smoother, more detailed and less likely for you to need a tetanus jab. They're doing Jaguars, Buccaneers, Sea King, Stalwarts, space rockets, even simple basic starter kits for those just getting into the hobby. The hobby is alive thanks to online communities welcoming new people to the hobby and nostalgic dads dragging their kits into the fray. Airfix isn't just surviving, they are thriving in a world gone mad for screens, scrolling and gaming. So there you have it, the roller coaster ride of Airfix, from 1950s to the 1970s peak to the near-death experiences of the 80s and 90s and 2000s, and back building empires one tiny rivet at a time. If you're not gluing something this weekend, you're doing life wrong. Like Lego, who dumped their wooden toys for plastic bricks, Airfix dumped their combs, their toys and games, and they've made scale model kits their empire. They didn't just build models, they built dreams, 2 bob at a time. And if you don't think that's one of the greatest stories in British industry and pop culture, you're probably still playing Call of Duty. There you go, that was my interpretation of the history of Airfix. Yes, I could have got into like deeper subject matter with the Kitmaster acquisition or the Meccano and Dinky acquisitions as well, or the fact that they were manufacturing companies, gimmicks, you know, like the Weebles, etc. I didn't want to get into that. I wanted to get back to the plastic. And yes, it has been one of those interesting exercises for me to actually go and look at what's out there when it comes to the history of Airfix, and it isn't always so clear, but I'm hoping that this has cleared up some of the questions you may have had of the whole time frame of Airfix with the Palitoy and the Borden, you know, and now with Hornby. So yeah, we're on to really great things. I can't or haven't seen another company with a great social media presence as Airfix has, to encourage people into the hobby. They have now released starter sets that are an absolute dream to build. If you've never built one, again, I suggest you go out and buy one and give it to somebody who's never built one. And their latest releases like the Jaguar, absolutely impeccable scale model, and it rightly said by many on YouTube, if that was put in a Tamiya box, you would think it was Tamiya. I can see really good things. And yes, people call me an Airfix fanboy. I prefer to be called an Airfix apologist. I do love and appreciate the brand. I've been building Airfix since I was 10 years old. I think it was 8 actually, from the times I was building stuff for my railway, because I was a train modeler when I was a little lad. But yeah, they've always been there, and let's hope for more great years from Airfix to come. If you have any thoughts or comments, leave them in the box below, because I do enjoy reading your thoughts on these subjects. And there you are, that's it from me. Thank you so much for watching. If you like this video, click like. If you haven't subscribed yet, please subscribe, ring that bell, click all to be notified when I release a new video. Huge shout out goes to my channel members who help me financially with this channel. If you'd like to become a channel member, just click join below and select which membership tier you so wish. We have a Tuesday night live stream where we build on our benches, talk technique and talk about scale modelling. If you'd like to become part of that, again, please click join below. In one of the 4 corners will be a playlist or another video from my channel that you might be interested in. And again, have a great rest of your week. Take care.